Good morning, everyone. I am Joanna Pineda. I'm CEO and Chief Troublemaker here at Matrix Group International, and I'm so excited that my friend Jane Barwis from BRG Communications is here with me today. So it's the first time I've done a webinar with you, Jane.
Yeah, very excited. Hello, everyone.
So Jane and I are good friends. We are in a CEO peer group, and we get together once a month. And we were talking a few months ago about how so many of our clients seem to be rebranding, right? And it's for a variety of reasons. We'll talk about that. But I said, gosh, a whole bunch of my clients seem to be rebranding. And I said, I'm not sure that all of them need to be.
Right.
And Jane said, well, I feel the same way. And I said, oh, my God, do we have the making of a webinar here?
We have something to talk about.
Right. And so Jane is a branding expert. She runs a leading communications, branding, and PR firm in Alexandria, works with foundations, government agencies, private companies, for-profit companies, and associations. And we'll talk about Matrix in a second, but I'm so excited to be doing this with Jane because I'm so appreciative of her work. I'm very impressed by it. And even though our services overlap a little bit, we actually find ways to partner because there's just a lot of synergy between our two companies.
Absolutely.
So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. So hopefully everybody is muted, and that allows you all to, maybe take a phone call, play with the dog, whatever it is that you need to be doing, while we're doing the webinar. We will send you a copy of the slides and the recording in the next 48 hours. So if you feel like watching this again, if you'd like to share this with other in your organizations, please do. We've muted everyone, but we are really hoping that you'll have questions for us. So if you have a question, go back to the chat in Zoom, and I've got Brian here staffing the webinar, and he'll let us know that we've got questions. So we'll take questions during the webinar as well as at the end, and certainly after the webinar, feel free, via email, social, to let us know. If you do have questions or if you're having trouble during the webinar, call this number, and Renee Hall is going to help you out. And give us some love on social. We're at Matrix Group and at BRG Living. You ready?
Ready.
All right.
Ready to roll.
So many of you know Matrix Group, but for those of you who don't, welcome to your Matrix webinar. And we're a digital agency here in Arlington, Virginia. We work almost exclusively, but not entirely, with associations and nonprofits, and they really hire us to help them solve these 4 problems. Maybe there's some type of a membership issue that they're trying to fix, or there's a membership retention. We're working currently with a couple of clients that have membership retention rates that are too high, really, and so they're really working on that. Many of them are trying to reach new audiences with a clear brand, clear messaging, et cetera. And then often organizations do look to us because they've got a back office that's really kind of chaotic, disjointed, not that user-friendly to their staff and to their membership. So we do a whole lot of custom programming and integrations. Here are our services. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but it all starts with creating, kind of identifying your goals, developing a strategy for it, and then implementing these interactive tools, whether it's a website, a mobile app, a social strategy, e-marketing, custom databases, et cetera, all of those things. We work with trade associations, professional societies, foundations. Here are just a few of them. So we hope you'll let us know if we can be of assistance. Jane, tell us about BRG.
Well, as Joanna generously said, we are a branding and PR firm. We're located in Old Town Alexandria. We're celebrating 18 years in business this year. We do work with corporations, nonprofits, associations, and medical societies, so a nice broad scope where we can take learnings from each of those organizations and apply it. Some of the things that we do for our clients are addressing critical health, wellness, and social issues. It's the area that we primarily focus in. We've got healthcare.
About that.
Yeah, that's our love. And the cool thing is wellness really goes beyond just, people automatically think of fitness, but wellness is really much broader. It's education, it's finance, it's all those things that make a balanced life. So that's kind of what we look at. We also focus a lot on brands, building brands, strengthening brands, getting the brand message out there, making sure our clients are on message, which is a lot what we're going to talk about today. We also do a lot of education and awareness campaigns. So, all those campaigns that are do these 5 things, don't do these 4 things. We do a lot of those campaigns to help educate consumers and targeted audiences. And we do that a lot through earned media, paid opportunities, social content, and owned marketing programs. We also build a lot of thought leadership programs. So a lot of our executives come to us and, or it's the person who's responsible for the executive being out there speaking, but we frame out thought leadership programs that support the brand or the mission of the organization. Some of our services, I've already touched on a few of these. Just like Joanna said, I won't spend a lot of time here, but we are a full service firm. We cover the scope with strategic planning, obviously research and testing, and then all the way through influencer engagement, thought leadership, media relations. Earned media is a big strength of ours. We have a design shop in-house, so we usually can fit your needs or partner with great organizations such as Joanna's.
And here are some of your fabulous
clients. Here are some of our clients. As you can see, like I said, these are just a small representation of some of the clients that we've worked with in the past or are currently working with. And you can see there's a lot of associations, nonprofits, and some bigger corporate names.
So we're going to be talking about branding, rebranding, brand refresh. Here's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about when it's time to rebrand, when it's not time to rebrand, elements to consider for creating and launching a successful brand, and transition strategies for when you have an organization with really multiple stakeholders. And almost every single one of our clients, you all on the phone, you're probably serving members, prospects, the board, the public, Capitol Hill, lawmakers, regulators, et cetera. So we'll talk about when to hold on to an existing brand. And then, really at the end, no matter what you decide to do, it's really about building deeper equity in your current brand so that, and we'll talk to you about this, but it's really not about your colors. It's really about establishing the brand promise so that people know what you come to represent and can expect in the way of product, services, and how you deliver it from your brand. So, Jane, you brought me this quote, and I absolutely love it. Tell me what this means to you.
So there are a couple good quotes out there. This is one of them that I love, and I thought it was a good way to start this conversation off because I think we all need to be in the same place of what a brand is and what it is not. To Joanna's point, it's not just about color. The brand is not just your logo. It's not just your identity. It's so much more, and it truly is the accumulated sum of all these things. It's your audience's gut feeling about your organization or your product or your service when they hear about you. Your brand communicates in so many more ways than I think a lot of times people think about. It communicates obviously in the visuals. I mean, I think everybody, that's the first thing people think of, your logo, your imagery, your website, your materials. But beyond that, it's the written and verbal messages that you put out there. And by you, I mean every single your board, your executives, your members, your partners. It's how you're talked about. It's your organizational promise, and whether or not it's fulfilled. I mean, whether or not it's fulfilled can really damage or build the brand credibility. It's also the perception of your organization, and obviously, let's all face it, we can't always control the perceptions. We can just do the best we can to form that perception, but once that perception is set, that is what people think about your brand.
That becomes the brand.
It becomes the brand. Perception is reality. And also one of the things that we talk about a lot is it's that first impression, that you make on any of your key stakeholders. It could be a prospective member, a prospective partner organization, but it's the very first impression is so important.
I love this slide, Jane, so much because if you look at it all together, you really have to think about how your brand has to be consistent across all of these different variables. So I'll give you an example. We were working with an organization, and they said, we really want our members to know that we're warm and caring. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we said was, but the language on your website isn't warm and caring. It's almost too stiff and formal. And so that becomes kind of a brand dissonance, mm-hmm. right? Because you really want to portray the organization as warm and caring, but the tone isn't. So anyway.
That's absolutely true, because you can't exactly put out there, our brand's warm and caring. Right. You have to demonstrate that right. through your word choice and through right. your imagery and through your interaction.
Right, exactly. It's kind of like, everybody says, oh, we're all about customer service. Well,
and then you can't get a hold of anybody.
Right, exactly. Right. Or they don't really care about what you have
right.
to say.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is it time to rebrand? So Jane, you've got clients saying, I need a brand. I need to rebrand, I need a brand refresh, I need to completely upend my identity. So when is it time?
So anybody who is in any kind of marketing or communications position has probably had bosses over the years going, what about our brand? It's time to rebrand. And so we just put together a little bit of a list here. This isn't an end-all, be-all list, but it's some things to think about. And when your organization is going through something like this, it might be time to rebrand. So think about if your organization has gone through an acquisition or a merger, which then creates a difference in the organization. You might have new products or services being offered that your current brand doesn't really support or represent.
You're reaching out to completely new audiences.
Completely new audiences.
Never spoken to the public, right? If you're all that.
It's, a couple of our clients have gone through this where the industry or the profession that they're representing has really evolved. Yeah, and it's a different thing. So the old brand isn't going to support what the new industry is doing. Right. So that's a big one that we run into a lot. Also, unfortunately, sometimes you have to rebrand if you're just in a really negative situation, be it your fault or it could be even your industry space that's going through some beating up. And it might be time to just really look at it and start fresh. Some of the other things that we look at is we work with a lot of medical societies, and with medical societies, there's usually the big overarching, organization, and then within that, there are so many subspecialties, and we work with them to really own their space. They don't have to compete against the big organization; they can work along with them, but their brand needs to communicate that really specific expertise areas. So that's like that's their ground to own. And then also geography changes. I mean, if you're a state or a regional organization, if you add on to that, you might want to change your name. Also, we've worked with several that have gone domestic to international, and obviously then it might warrant a brand change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you a story about this. So one thing that we say is just because you're redesigning your website doesn't mean that you need to rebrand.
Amen.
Right, and I think a lot of organizations think that they should because they don't like the website, but it doesn't mean that you need to completely upend your brand. I mean, especially if you still represent what you did, before the redesign, if you're primarily still doing the same products and services to the same membership, serving them, et cetera, but maybe you need to just change kind of the representation of the brand through the website.
Yeah, Joanna and I were talking as we were prepping for this, and a phrase came out that I really like. It's like, if you're tired of your brand or you don't like your brand or your board or your members, whatever, it may not be the brand's fault.
Right.
It might just be your marketing or your programming or how you're demonstrating or living that brand. So I really like that takeaway.
Well, let's talk about when you shouldn't.
Okay, so when it might not be time to rebrand. Don't let go of your brand. So if you have significant brand equity, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I think
Apple or Coke.
Yeah, Apple, Coke.
AARP.
It could, right? AARP is a great one. And AARP is a great example too, because they have completely changed what those letters stand for.
Absolutely.
And they didn't rebrand;
Yes.
they just repositioned.
Yes.
And there's a big difference. So if you have a really solid brand, you might not want to go away from it. Now, on the flip side of that, some people think they have a lot of brand equity, but once they do some research and testing, they realize they really don't.
Yes.
So you have to be very real with yourself about that one. Also, if you're celebrating a significant anniversary, I don't know how often you get this call. Oh, we're coming up on our 50th anniversary. We want to rebrand. It's our time for a fresh start. It's like, no, if you have a great brand, just celebrate that anniversary. You don't have to change. Now, unless it coincides with some of the things on our previous slide.
Completely changing your focus.
Right, if you truly are.
And Jane, what we've done for some clients is if they're celebrating a significant anniversary, they want, some of them have created an anniversary logo.
Yep, yeah, we did that ourselves,
An anniversary campaign that really kind of celebrates the past, heralds the future, but doesn't really kind of let go of the brand. So then you keep the brand there.
Right. You use that anniversary logo for that year, and then it goes back to your old logo, which is good. So the next couple bullets are really, truly what typically sparks this conversation. Either the board feels it's time to shake things up, or you get some new leadership and they want to make their mark. other organizations in your space are rebranding. And I know these are all really complex conversations to have because, again, it's your board or your leadership, so on and so forth. So that's when you really do have to apply some logic and some research to prove out why it may not be time to rebrand.
We do have some organizations that say we're going through some tough times. Revenue's down, membership is down, course registrations are down, maybe we need to rebrand. And to your point, Jane, we asked the question, is it really the branding? Is there something else that needs to be addressed?
Don't blame it on the brand.
Don't blame it on the brand. Maybe there's something else that somehow is failing in the execution of the brand, right? Now, to your point, if the organization perhaps has gained a reputation for not being responsive to its customers, to its members, again, you don't have to completely abandon the brand, but
you can do a campaign.
You can do a campaign or just change, right, you know, how you're servicing your members.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's rebrand. For the organization that says, you know what, it really is time. Right?
Yep, I went through the checklist and it is time.
Yeah, like we've got some clients that really did change, right? They now are serving a completely different audience, or maybe they've expanded the audience, you know, whatever it is. So they decide to do brand. How's it done? Let's talk about this.
So before anybody starts this process, there are a couple things that we always recommend. And Joanna, I'm sure you do the same because these are things that people forget to do. First and foremost, identify a clear reason why you're rebranding and what that new brand needs to accomplish. You know, it's kind of that old saying, if you don't have a map or if you don't know your final destination, how are you going to know when you get there? So, you know, really identify, like, go back to that list and whatever reasons you checked off, make sure that the new brand can fulfill that. Then really establish, well, I already said, you know, establish what it needs to accomplish, but then you need to build a realistic timeline. We have clients all the time come and say, we need a new brand and we need it in a month.
By the board meeting.
Or by the board meeting, or by the, like, really truly rebranding and doing it the right way can take 6 months. It can take a year, you know, depending on your organization and how quickly decisions are made or how quickly people want to move. And then identify all the touch points that the rebrand is going to impact. You know, people automatically go to, business cards and marketing folders and letterhead and the website. You know, those are the first things people think of. But you need to go deep and think about all the touch points your brand currently has, and then think about the future touch points that you want the new brand to have.
And also, if you're really rebranding, as in you're reframing your mission, you're reframing who you serve, that means all your messaging has to change. How you communicate has to change. That's not going to be a quick process.
No, it's not.
I've got a story here. I used to be on the board of an organization here in Arlington called the Arlington Community Temporary Shelter, so a shelter for homeless families and victims of domestic violence. And they changed their name to Doorways for Women and Families. Much more kind of
welcoming,
much more welcoming. But also it really spoke to their expanding geography. They weren't just Arlington. So I chaired their fundraiser, and so after three years on the envelope saying Doorways for Women and Families, formerly the Arlington Community Temporary Shelter, the executive director said, I think it's time for us to remove formerly taxed because it's been 3 years. And I said, oh God, okay, with much trepidation, but we did, and then we realized that attendance at the fundraiser was way down. So we're in a panic. I'm meeting with my committee. We're a month out, and I said, oh, my God, what's happening? We started making calls to previous attendees. They didn't know who Doorways was. I said, you know, you've been to the Doorways brunch for many years, but we see you haven't come. And they said, Doorways? I go to the tax brunch. So despite the fact that 3 years had elapsed, and despite the fact that there had been a zillion emails and announcements and newsletters and letters and all that stuff, you still had a segment of the population that was very loyal, came to the brunch every year.
They just needed that personal connection.
They hadn't processed it.
Yeah.
Right? They get the stuff in the mail, but they hadn't processed it. So this is potentially time-consuming, really something that
and that's also to the point of identifying all the touch points.
Yes.
You have to think about all your audiences. And to your point, you had this base of really loyal supporters, and, they needed to be spoken to in a very different way than somebody who was just experiencing the brand for the first time.
Yes.
So everybody, any organization that, approaches rebranding, and there's a million different approaches that you can do. I just shared this one because this is what we do at BRG. we take a 4-step approach. And Joanna agreed, she liked it, so we put it in
did.
here. We go through these stages. It's discovery, define, develop, and launch. In discovery, you uncover the unique challenges and opportunities. You really take a good look at things. You do a lot of research. We'll go through that in a moment. In the define stage, that's when you figure out what's unique and how you're going to stand out from your competition. And then the development is the fun part. That's where most people want to begin. Most people want to go right to get our designer on board and start designing some new logos, you know. But development really should only happen after you've done your homework. And then obviously the launch. Great brands have succeeded or died because of the way they launched. So that's a really important piece that you have to be thinking about from the beginning. So in the Discover section, this is where we call it, it's like our brand assessment. The key here is to make sure that you're really taking a deep dive look both internally and externally. A lot of times our clients will, you know, that are going through this, you know, they want to appease their internal audience or their stakeholders, their members, which is, of course, really important, you know, where they talk to their staff. But at the end of the day, sometimes that's just talking to yourself. You need to get out there and look at the broader landscape, look at prospective members, look at ancillary organizations or, you know, people in other professions. So it's really important to do that. And then we also recommend pulling all of your existing communications items and getting feedback on, was it a successful tool, was it not, why do you think so, either way, really analyzing what your organization has done and where the successes are.
And Jane, what I love about this process is the interviews with the stakeholders.
Huge part of the process.
I love them. And what I tell clients is to make sure that you don't only talk to people who are very invested in the brand, right? Because you've got board members who
get the hairy ones, yeah.
Folks who actually, you know, it's funny. My creative director and I, Alex, he says, give me people who hate you, right? Yeah. Because that'll give you insight into something.
And the key is, the key is you may never flip them, you may never get them to love you, but at least you'll know what your worst traits are that you can work on.
And God forbid you flip them. And
right.
If nothing else, what we find is they'll say, wow, you actually took the time to listen.
And then they're more receptive, right?
Yeah, and they'll say, wow, I can't believe they called me. Like, I'm such a big critic.
I matter.
So I love these interviews. They can be group interviews. They can be one-to-one. I think sometimes you can get, some of these opportunities and some of these insights get lost in a survey. Yep. Right, depending on how you phrase it.
I was going to say that. Or they get lumped in with some other tool that the organization always does. So it could be their annual survey, their membership survey, their annual convention attendee survey. And what I find is so often when we say the word research, you get this reaction, like people don't want to spend the money, they don't want to put the time into it.
I totally agree with you.
And it's the biggest mistake. Think of how much more costly and how much more time intensive launching a brand that's not successful is going to be. Trying to recover from that.
How much more confident are you in the plan, knowing that you've got all this good research, knowing that you talked to a whole bunch of people across all the different stakeholder groups, and you did your research, and you're pretty confident in this direction. But you can also go to your board and say, look, this is really what the membership is telling us.
So another part of the research that we always recommend, and it's really important, is I call it comparative research.
We call it the competitive analysis.
Yeah. Well, there's a competitive analysis, and then we also do a benchmarking.
Yeah.
So the competitive analysis is just like it says. I mean, and when we're working with nonprofits.
Call it competitive, but usually it's all partners, right?
Yeah. So when we're working with nonprofits, they like to say, oh, we don't have any competitors. That's fine. Call them like-minded organizations. That's okay. But this is where you look at the landscape.
Sorry about that. I'll tell you in a second, but go ahead.
You just look at the landscape and you see what everybody else is doing. And it's not so much to compare yourself to what they're doing. It's so that at the end of the day, you can create your opportunity. You can find where the gaps are in what's being offered or how things are being talked about. And that's where you can really develop this really unique brand position. The other piece is best practices. And so we do some benchmarking and best practices always. And that could be an organization or an industry that has nothing to do with what you do, but they might have gone through a similar challenge or a similar history or be facing a similar change. And that way you can take key learnings to help frame out your approach.
So my story about the we don't have any competitors is very interesting. So we were working with a professional society in environmental management, and we were talking to the staff. We started with the staff, and we said, who are your competitors? And they said, we have no competitors. There's no organization doing what we do. And I said, wow, what an amazing...
Wow, that's incredible.
And, you know, great. Had coffee with the president, and I said, hey, talk to me about your competitors. And she said, oh my God, we've got loads. And I said, well, that's fascinating because your staff thinks you don't have competitors. And she said, we don't have competitors that do exactly what we do, but we have competitors that really compete with us on the research side. They're taking our research dollars. We have competitors on the education side, and they're taking our education dollars. We have competitors on the news side. It's being chipped away. So you got to look at those too, right? To see what they're doing, how they're branding, how they're providing the services that somehow is, you know, hurting you potentially.
Exactly.
And I love these outcomes.
Yeah. So once you do all this, you get a really good picture of what's going on around you, and then you can flip that internal and say, okay, well, what do we want to accomplish? And what do we want our brand to be about? What's our value proposition? What can we offer that nobody else is really offering? And that's where you really get a competitive edge. You also want to think about beyond just, you know, what your logo is going to look like. What is your brand? What are the brand attributes you want people to know you about? Joanna talked about earlier, well, we're warm and friendly. Well, if those are going to be brand attributes, you need to think about that before you even start your branding process.
Absolutely.
To make sure it's reflected. Your brand attribute could be we educate, we provide all the information for people to learn and grow.
Give you the competitive edge.
Yeah, but you have to think about all those attributes. You have to think about what your promise is. You know, every brand should be giving a promise to their customers or to their members. And if you don't know what that is, how the heck do you know if you're going to accomplish it or not? Your mission, your vision, these are terms you hear about a lot. And then you get into writing your message platform. The way we recommend approaching it is map out each of your stakeholder groups. So anybody who you communicate with.
Personas, we love this.
Map out their personas. Yep. Who is this person? You know, what's their world like? What do they think about? What do they worry about?
Yeah.
You know, what kind of language works? Yeah, what kind of language works for them? And then we build a matrix, which is, you know, we take each core message that we want to deliver. You know, we always challenge our clients. What is the one thing, if you only had one thing for this stakeholder group to know about you, what would it be? And it could be the same thing across all stakeholders, but the way you say it will be different because you want to be relevant to that stakeholder group. So doing this as part of the branding process is critical because once you start designing a logo, it makes you think about all the stakeholders that you're talking to. And it's not just about what color do we like or what symbol do we like or what name do we like. Once you start thinking about the bigger picture, it makes you much more aware and in tune with what you're trying to accomplish with your rebrand.
Yeah, love it.
We did take a moment to just put some definitions down here just to give you guys some good takeaways. Just like branding is an overused word with lots of wrong definitions, so are some of these things: brand attribute, brand promise, brand mission, brand vision. So we just gave you a quick definition for some of these things that you can take back.
You know, I think I like this slide a lot, you know, when you're working on it, because you can take it back to your teams and then say, what are our brand attributes? We're warm, we're caring, we're
even if you're not doing a rebrand, you should ask yourself these things all the time.
And you shouldn't, and once you've determined them and you've kind of ascertained that this is what they are, you should be reminding your staff and your membership about your brand attributes and your brand promise. I mean, you're not going to say we're warm and caring, but there are lots of different ways to say that. One of the best brand promises I ever heard was from an organization that said, we help our members make money and stay out of trouble.
That's awesome.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, very clear.
And when you say it that way, it's like, oh, heck yeah.
Yeah, I need them.
Yeah, exactly. Make money and stay out of trouble. So, love it.
So, moving into the develop stage.
And I would say, I don't think this is the most fun part. All of it.
It depends on your perspective, right?
I know, that's true. Right. Everyone wants to get to this piece,
This is
though.
the one, like people get
candy.
We'll get RFPs, and it's like, we need a new logo. It's logo design. This is where if you want to rename also, if you're going to rename your organization, that falls in here too. And we get a lot of organizations coming to us going, we don't know if we're going to rename or not or rebrand, and we always take them back to those first two steps. They need to go through that before they just make a decision like that.
Absolutely.
But once you've done your homework, then you get into the develop stage, and that is really framing out what your identity is going to look like. And the identity is more than the logo, obviously. When you're doing your logo, you want to have a couple different examples. We always recommend testing your potential logo or your potential new name with the key audiences. Again, the word testing makes people panic and think money. There are simple ways to do testing online now that do not cost a lot of money. You might have to provide a little bit of incentive for people to do it, but you'd be amazed what people do for, like, you know, a Starbucks gift card or something. So we always recommend testing, because if you're internal,
yep,
you're going to see it differently than your external audiences are going to see it.
And you want to test with people who are really familiar with the brand,
right,
and people who are not.
That's a great point.
It'll be amazing what kind of reactions you get.
Mm-hmm. And then during this process, also, once you decide on your brand, then you want to develop brand guidelines. And a lot of times, you know, brand guidelines, people automatically know, okay, this is our logo, this is how you can use it, how you can't use it, these are the colors, these are the fonts. That all is really, really critical to put in your brand guidelines. But we usually recommend taking it a step further and thinking about what kind of imagery should be used with your brand. And that goes right into designing a website or designing collateral pieces. Like, you know, we want soft imagery of people doing this, or we want imagery of the environment, you know. So it seems like a no-brainer sometimes, but if you put it in your brand guidelines, anybody who comes to the organization down the road who hasn't been through the process, or any partner you bring in to work with you, has a clear map of how they should communicate their relationship with you.
You know, the photos are super, super critical. I think sometimes people think, well, the logo guidelines are, we always have circles, you know, but we actually take a step back and we say, when we're doing a website or we're doing any kind of a rebrand, or just in general, we're asking clients about imagery. We ask our clients, should the images be about you and what you provide, or about your members and their products and services, or who they serve?
Or the outcome.
Right.
Right?
So when we work with, like, you know, one of our clients is the Food Marketing Institute. They represent the grocery stores. And we ask them every time we do a project, because you never know, it might change, right?
Right.
We say, should it be about you and what you provide? Should it be about the membership, or should it be about who you serve? And they always say it's about who our members serve. It's about the families, the individuals who they are serving. Yes, of course, there's going to be supporting imagery about our members. It's almost never about the association.
Yep. Yeah, that's
so
a great
one
point.
thing I want to talk about with logos, Jane, we talked about this, and I thought this was worth discussing, is you have some organizations that might have really a very long history, and they're tired of the logo, or it seems really dated. So, for example, we're working with an international union, and they've got kind of a really complicated seal. You see those seals, like, you know, dating back to the 1910s or something. And organizations will say, God, these seals, they just look so old-fashioned, or they'll say they're hard to work with, right? So
and they are.
They are hard to work with. So what we've done sometimes, and I'd love your opinion on this, is, you know, one, we'll do the research to see kind of how much brand equity is there in the seal, and what kind of an uproar are you going to get if you get rid of it. But what we've done sometimes is we've created, you called it a brand within a brand, and we've called it a campaign. So we've kept the seals, but we've created new logos and new, you know, kind of marks for specific campaigns that maybe show off an aspect of the organization and what they're trying to do. Go ahead.
There, you can always
play. Tough, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
100-year-old logo.
And they're usually really intricate too.
Yes,
you know, so they don't scale very well and everything else. So you can either pull elements out of it so they still feel tied to that history, or, like you're saying, you can frame around it. So it's a brand within a brand. We worked a few years ago. We worked with the Air Force Aid Society, and, you know, as you can imagine, a military logo is like, you know, you don't touch it, right? But they wanted to refresh their logo, and so we had to go through and map out, like, the history of the different branches of military and what all those little symbols are. You know, the eagle, why is he facing one way or the other, or the, you know, the leaf underneath. We went through and we defined what each one of those elements historically means, so that we could break down, like, why it's on their logo or their brand. And then we could go from there to say, like, okay, what components do you still want, and what components are the most important to your organization? And so we took them through this transition, a very traditional organization. We took them through a transition where they could refresh their brand, but it still had that historical meaning to it.
What's your take on font treatment versus imagery?
Font treatment, first of all, I think font treatment is something that people don't, they do too easily. They do too willy-nilly, you know.
I agree. It's almost too easy. Anyone can
yeah.
do it. You just pick a good font.
Well, and we talked about this too. We're just going to use our acronym.
Oh, God, yes,
definitely.
definitely.
The full name of our organization.
Right.
Now, a lot of times when people do this, or organizations do this, it's because their historical name doesn't properly reflect
like
who they are today.
Yeah. We're the Association for the Advancement of Retired People, but I got my letter in the mail. I'm not retired. Haven't joined yet. Although, as my son says, in a few years, Mom, you'll get the discount at IHOP. So you better join.
That's when it really matters. No, well, it's a good example because, again, this is where I go back to don't overestimate your brand equity and your brand recognition. So we live here in DC, and we are slapped up with a million acronyms every day. Yes. And a lot of them are identical, even though the organizations do completely different things. I mean, do I bring up NRA?
Right.
Like national restaurants or guns? Which one is it? Right. You know, and so you can't always just jump to an acronym. You know, maybe you need to step back and think about a rebrand or even renaming to better define your organization. So I think people just do it as an easy sidestep. The other way they can do it is if you're going to change just use your acronym, make sure you have a strong tagline.
Yes.
That defines what you do and who you are and who you service.
Right. And I think
that's another way to do it.
Don't be afraid to say, we used to be this, but now we're just going by.
Don't ignore your past, right.
Don't ignore it, because first of all, you'll get lost, right? And some people will be really turned off by the fact that you seem to be kind of turning your back on the past. So, but the strong tagline will really help. So let's talk about launch, because this is so important, and I think people think we're just going to launch the new logo.
Yep, we're just going to slap it on everything and put out a press release to anybody and everybody, right? So what we recommend is really stepping back, and this goes back, look at your stakeholder mapping with your messaging that was already done. How many people and different people in different groups do you need to communicate this logo to, this new brand to, and what does it mean to them? So we always recommend starting with your internal audiences.
Absolutely.
Because you want them to be your brand ambassadors. So they need to understand the brand and be able to talk about the brand and feel good about the brand before anybody else, right? Because they are the first touch points with that brand. So we usually recommend starting with them, then doing a simple roll to go out to your members. And, your members and if you have affiliates or your next circle, your partners. Get on board with that. And a lot of times organizations will tie this to like their annual meeting or something like that, because it's a nice moment in time to kind of share that. Then once that has all been done, it's kind of like the inside secret is there, everybody inside the group knows. Then you go to external. That's when you go bigger with your launch or your splash or your, this organization is changing this and why and everything else. So this is just kind of the cadence that we talk about and how you do transitions. There are a million little pieces that go into that, but we kind of wanted to cover the cadence.
I think what's important about this slide too is to know that if you take a look, like that the arrow is getting bigger, right? Because your audience grows, as the launch really progresses. But also you need to think about how long this is going to take.
Oh yeah.
This is not something that's going to take a couple of weeks. This is not something that you announce in an email, post on your website, put in a newsletter, and you're done, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like in the case of the doorways example that I gave, this is something that you're going to be talking about and reminding people of for a long time, and you got to figure out how to really reach them. If it's a pretty drastic brand refresh, as in you've completely changed your name, right? People may not even recognize you, so you've got to make sure that people make a connection between the old name and the new brand.
Absolutely.
So and to your point, how long does this take? 6 months, a year? I'd say about a year at least.
At least a year, and it just depends on how dramatic your shift is. If you're just, adding a word or something like that, but the name or the colors are still the same, like it's not as hard, it's not as difficult for people to absorb. You know, sometimes they won't even absorb it, but they still recognize you, right? But if you're completely changing, it can take a long time.
And I want people to think about this, right? So I look a lot at the analytics for our clients for the website as well as for email analytics. And so you figure a 20-25% open rate is really good, right? But that means 75% of the people that you're mailing really haven't gotten your message. So over the span of a year, there's a huge swath of your population that didn't get the message about the rebrand. So you got to figure out new ways to reach them and really tell the story in new and different ways.
Right, exactly. So all of that has been said if you decide to rebrand. Now, if you go through that list that we gave at the beginning, you're like, yeah, no, maybe we don't need to rebrand. There are still some things you can do to just give some extra energy to your existing brand. So first is the brand refresh. And, you know, sometimes people do this because they're afraid to rebrand, so they just want to take a baby step. But it can be done, and it can really lift the organization. A brand refresh is good when, you know, you have a long history with your brand, or you have really strong recognition or equity, or frankly, if your organization isn't comfortable with rebranding, it's too much of a step.
The organization hasn't really changed.
Exactly.
But the brand looks dated.
It looks dated,
so
or
it's the trade association where they were like, you know what, we're the same organization. We're serving the same membership, we're providing the same products and services, but the brand really looks dated. So they made a slight tweak to the logo to just make it look a little bit more modern.
That's all you can do. You might change the font to be more updated. You might add a complementary color to your core color. Add a tagline. There's a lot of different ways you can shift what your brand is without changing your brand.
Now, do you recommend, in the case of this organization, they made a slight tweak to the logo, didn't even change the colors. Do you think they even need to communicate that?
It depends on how subtle it is. If it's super subtle, I don't think so. I think if you're adding a word or changing something like that, you have to communicate at least your internal audience why you're doing it.
Yes.
And otherwise
someone's going to say, hey, what the heck happened?
What's going on? Yeah.
Or they'll keep using the old logo.
Right. And that's a big challenge. You know, once you do any of these, be it rebranding or a brand refresh, you have to make sure that you're being represented consistently across the board. Like that old logo needs to go away. So that's a big one.
You know, this is many years ago now, but there was an article in Ad Age, really as social media was just starting to get popular. So this is many years ago, but Ad Age said, for the largest brands, and that's maybe some of you on the call, you no longer are producing the vast majority of the messaging about your brand.
Sure.
So it means, in some ways, you've lost control of the brand.
You may own the brand.
You may own the brand, but you
may not be shaping it.
Right?
Yep.
So, exactly. So all these logos are in the wild, the messaging about the brand variable. So how do you make, and I think the key to that is to be so strong in your branding that people don't stray from it because you're so clear.
Yeah, and make the brand accessible. You know, so if you have partners or affiliates and with your members, make sure you create a toolkit that they can easily access so they're not struggling to be like, where's that brand or where's that logo, where's the messaging, you know, how do we say this? Like, make sure you make all of your materials accessible to everyone.
Oh my God. So I am a Cub Scout leader, okay? And I still say BSA, I still say Boy Scouts of America, but they're not the Boy Scouts of America anymore. They're now Scouts BSA. This is going to take me a lifetime to not have BSA.
Especially a brand like that. I mean, the history in that.
But that's fraught.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So
the last thing we really want to talk about is delivering on your brand. I mentioned this at the beginning. The brand is not just about your name or your logo or your colors. I think we're all there now. But you could have a brand and not need to change, but you know, if you're feeling it's stagnant or you're not being recognized or you're having challenges drawing members in, it may be because you're not really delivering on your brand promise, you know, your value proposition, the things we talked about earlier. And that is quite often the case of when we start engaging with an organization because they're just not achieving those goals for some reason. And this is when we say, don't blame the brand. It might be your programming, it might be your marketing, it might be what you're delivering.
Or maybe you need to expand the brand. Like
you
feel like the brand is really boring because you haven't fully fleshed out the brand guidelines to include additional colors and like different types of imagery, for example, or different ways that you can use the brand.
Well, true. And even beyond that, how are you delivering that brand externally?
Right.
Well, internally also. So we talked about internal being so important for your brand ambassadors. You can't just do that one time.
Yes.
Because your staff changes, they forget about it, they have a million other things on their mind. So you should be using your brand promise and mission to drive employee engagement.
And
like every single employee should know what that brand means. What does it mean to work for this organization? And that's something you can do annually. You can do it every 6 months. It never gets old.
You can do it at every staff meeting.
Absolutely.
To really kind of reinforce what this brand means. If a big part of your brand is deep customer awareness, deep involvement with your membership, for example, like show them what that looks like so that
and provide training and provide the training. If you're saying that's what your brand is about and an employee isn't being given the opportunity to learn that, there's a disconnect.
And the disconnect is really important. Jane, we talked about how company culture is the flip side to external brand.
Absolutely.
Right? So again, if you say we're warm and fuzzy, accessible, authentic, but internally you're not warm, fuzzy, authentic.
Doors are closed, nobody talks. It doesn't make sense.
And people are going to know that it's just words, and then the brand becomes hollow.
Yeah, it doesn't mean. Then the same of that is the external campaigns.
Right.
So yeah, everybody thinks about their web, their marketing materials, whatever, and they create it, and they think, okay, well then it's done. No, you should be delivering on your brand at every touch point, every exposure. So think about how you go to market or how you go to trade shows or how you represent the brand at your annual meeting. Like every one of those external touch points should constantly reinforce the brand. And Joanna, I'm sure you can speak a lot to how websites need to constantly change, right?
Absolutely.
The brand is the same, but you need to keep evolving.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing that we do a lot of work on, and I don't think people always think about this, is every brand, if it's done right, stands for something, right?
Absolutely.
And
we say that.
So there is an opportunity for thought leadership.
A better place, we say.
Yeah. So if you really want to own that, you need to get out there and talk about that. You're not talking about your organization. You're talking about the subject matter. You're talking about the domain, the space that your organization thrives in, right? So it's your executives or your board members. They need to be out there. You have to be at events, sponsoring events that are trying to further that cause. You need to be out there speaking about the broader issue. Think of it like an education organization. They need to be out there talking about STEM and talking about funding issues and things like that. They're not out there promoting their brand. Right? They're out there trying to further the issue. Being a leader in thought properties. So I think that's like a deeper piece of elevating your brand and building equity in your brand that sometimes never happens.
Well, and I think this is so important. Think about it. When you think about thought leadership, it's really the content and the messaging, right? It's how you're saying it, but it's really, at its core, it's what you're saying. So if you're rebranding, what you're saying has to change.
Absolutely.
You cannot redesign your website, but keep the content the same, right?
That's true.
Because then it's hollow. You really change the colors.
Yep. Absolutely.
And this takes work and this takes time.
It does. It takes a lot of time, and it takes dedication too.
Right.
You have to be consistent. If you are trying to further a certain cause, you want to be at the table talking about it. You want to be thought of as the go-to, like, well, they need to be here to talk about this issue. And it takes time to build that credibility. I mean, granted, some big organizations get it automatically, but many organizations need to fight for that place at the table.
Jane, who do you think in the organization should be in charge of articulating, defining, and protecting the brand?
Every single person.
Every single person, I agree with you. But there needs to be like a brand czar.
Sure. From a reviewing things or tweaking things, and that usually falls with the marketing department or advertising department or comms. I think comms should always be responsible for the messaging that supports the brand and how you talk about things and how you go out to your membership or potential members. But at the end of the day, every single person in that organization needs to live that brand and protect that brand.
Right. So, Brian, we'll take questions, by the way. We've saved time at the end of the webinar. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, in fact, please, exactly into, I think, the delivering of your brand slide you were just in. I think it's just questions digging a little bit deeper. What is your suggestion for contacting key stakeholders regarding the rollout of new logo and requesting all past uses be replaced with the new logo? And I think it's referring to organizations that have like chapters or have like personal sites or whatever the case might be.
Members who use the logo. So you've got some ideas, Jane. I've got.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is clarity. Don't be afraid to roll it out and to announce it. Make them feel part of the rollout. Come up with a nice campaign where they can engage with the brand and understand why the change is happening. If you did your homework and you did your stakeholder research, you should have talked to all those chapters, and you should know what's on their mind and what their buzz is, so when you roll it out, you can leverage that, right? But be crystal clear that this is our new logo, these are our new guidelines, this is how we talk about the organization, and we, after this date, please no longer use the old material. I mean, be clear, don't be afraid. But then you are going to have to do a little bit of policing, like Joanna just said. Somebody's got to be in charge of that. And when it's not used properly, you just have to be consistent. Send another reminder, hey, we noticed this, here's the logo, we'd love for you to use this. Or, we're not really using this language anymore, it would be great if you could use this. It's going to take time because people are, comfort is in that staying the same. Like, you don't want to change. Change is difficult. But if you stay consistent over time, it'll become the norm again. So I would say consistency and clarity are the two keys.
I agree. I've got a couple additional tips. One is you talked about the brand toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
absolutely.
making that available in print and online.
Definitely online, because people lose it.
Well, people lose it, but also if you make a jillion versions of the logo, the images, available to them, color, black and white, EPS, GIF, PMG, JPEG, et cetera. If you give them examples of, or if you give them photos that they can use, then it makes it easier because they'll say, oh, this is so much easier. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say is if you've got a fairly small universe, like we've got, a couple organizations that have under 100 chapters, when you have under 100, I think it's worth a phone call.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that phone call will take you a week.
Or you can even host a webinar. You can do, there's a lot of different ways you can roll it out from channels.
Yes, and I love the webinar idea because then you can take questions. They'll say.
Take questions and explain it, really, and show them, we did this research, and this is what you all had to say.
Yes.
Like, this was what you all wanted, or here's where you were struggling with the existing brand, so this is how we've evolved it to answer that.
And they can get clarity. They'll say, oh my God, the logo's different.
What does that mean?
Well, I have letterhead. Should I continue to use it, or do I need to pay for new stuff? And then you make a judgment call about, what to say about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how to transition it.
Absolutely. Do you have any more questions?
That's it for now.
Okay. Great. Well, while we're waiting for questions, we always end our webinars with an action plan, because what we want to do is for you to really walk away from this webinar and feel like, wow, I learned a lot, but here's some things that I need to do. And our first idea is to just, kind of step back before you even start thinking about your own brand. Like, look at your favorite brands. What do they represent? Have the companies rebranded recently? And what did that rebrand look like? And
this isn't just in your professional space. Like, I mean, as you're at the grocery store or driving down the street and you see a brand, I mean, think about, like, how do they communicate their brand? And are they consistent? Because you can take those key learnings back to your own company then. But I get inspired by brands that are out there every day and like clever things that they do to reinforce who they are.
I was actually having a conversation with Alex, my creative director, a while back about the Honda brand.
Oh.
The Honda brand has been really consistent in many ways, in that it was always meant to not be like high-end luxury, super expensive. It was really meant to be kind of affordable.
Affordable family.
Think about the first Civic and the Civic today. I mean, the very first Civic, I remember when it first came out, I was living in San Francisco, and it was this tiny, junky car. And then over time, kind of the reputation of Honda as a car maker really was burnished as this wonderful car company. Mm-hmm. And now it's got kind of an eco-friendly reputation even. So we were talking about kind of the brand evolution of Honda. Think about the brand evolution of, I mean, obviously it's fun to talk about the big companies.
Right, but even the big obvious ones.
But look at other organizations in your space, in healthcare, in manufacturing, so many, right? Mm-hmm. And then what do we do next? Evaluate your brand.
So evaluate your brand. Sit there and think about, do we have a clear brand promise, or are we just kind of all over the place, or are we not committing to something? Because if you're not committing to a promise, then you have to dig deeper and ask why. right?
Right.
So what is your brand promise? Everybody who's on the call, you should be thinking, what's our brand promise? And then if you do have that promise and you identify it, like, are you communicating that properly? Is that clear? Could you pick up the phone and ask a member? Would they know the answer? Could you pick up the phone and ask an industry partner? Would they know the answer?
Staff.
Ask your staff. Yeah, that's a good point. Start internally. Yeah, so it's just a simple thing to do. It doesn't cost you anything to ask those questions, right? And if the answer is no, then pull up the list that we just gave you of when it's time to rebrand, when it may be time to rebrand or may not be. It's like we said, it's a starter list, but it may get you at least halfway there to make a decision. And if it's not time for you to refresh, then really think about deepening your brand equity. And by that, I don't just mean logo recognition. I mean your brand equity in the sense of you are really making a difference in your space. You are moving the conversation forward. You are the first and foremost authority in your space, and you're sought after, because that's the way you deepen that brand.
Right.
So.
And think about it in terms of corporate culture and thought leadership externally, right? So again, going back to internally, the staff need to live the brand, they need to believe it, and they need to represent it every day, because they're the folks in the end who are interacting, with your membership. And then go out to your board. Your board needs to understand this, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who, if you're a membership association, they're the ones who the other members will look to for cues.
Right. Are they doing it? If they're not doing it, why should I do it?
Yeah. Does it really represent, who you are and who you want to be? Often, right, sometimes these brands are aspirational.
They should be. They should be. Otherwise, you're going to get bored really quick.
That's true. That's true. All right. So I don't know if we have any questions. Brian, do we have any questions?
I think we're good.
Well, if we can hang out for a couple more minutes, but we don't have questions. Like I said, within the next 24, 48 hours, we will send you a copy of this recording, a recording of this webinar, as well as a copy of the slides. Here's our contact information. Please be in touch. If you need help, if you've got questions, just give us a call. Be happy to just, Jane, I know you're with me. We'll just take a call about this stuff and talk to you about, whether or not any of this stuff is right for you. And let us know if we can help you with your branding or any other type of project. You've got a question.
Yeah, I have another one that came in. How do you handle a client who started a brand is not the same as their live brand?
How do you handle a client where basically there's brand dissonance, right?
Okay.
Like who they are does not match who they say they are?
Yeah. How do you handle a client whose stated brand is not the same as their lived brand or live brand?
Okay.
So brand dissonance, I think, is pretty common, actually, and that's where you really do have to get the backing of the leaders of the organization, and you have to be able to demonstrate to them where the gaps are. And this is where we go back, the tagline Joanna and I were playing with, like, don't blame the brand.
Right.
If they're, you have to, yeah, you have to look at, like, where the organization is faltering or what they're not being able to achieve. Because that's the number one way you'll get the attention of the board and the senior leadership, right? And then show that, well, maybe it's because you're not delivering on the brand, and start asking them those questions. Like, well, what does your brand really stand for? And how are you delivering on that? So sometimes it's just an overall awareness internally of the gap.
And Jane, I think how you handle this will differ based on whether you're external or internal.
Absolutely.
So you and
externally, you get a lot more leverage when you're.
Well, when we're hired, they want us to, tell their organization.
We assume they want our opinion.
Yeah, that's true. We assume that. It's not always the case, right? But we get to at least kind of say, here are some of the inconsistencies that we found.
Right.
But when you're internal, you have to be careful.
Right.
And
absolutely.
So I think in those situations, you got to figure out ways to maybe identify where this dissonance exists and call it out. And hopefully it's an organization that's at least open enough.
Yeah, and ask questions. Why is this? Or why don't we do this? Or have we ever thought of this?
Department. If you're the comms department, then I think you get to raise your hand and say, hey, guess what? We think that there's a problem. This is what we're hearing. We've got a gap, right? The other thing is, I always say, like, you can't fix this stuff overnight. So, and you'll hear me in my organization, we'll say, okay, if there's a problem, let's identify the problem, come up with the big list, and then what are we going to do in the next 30 days to make this better? And I think if you just keep thinking that way.
And start with baby steps.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be the big shifts. Like, just start chipping away at what you can accomplish in short periods of time.
And some of it is tiny. I'll tell you a funny story before we go. So this is a while ago. We were printing business cards, and I remember like the first set of business cards came back, and business cards are usually like uncoated stock. But Alex said, our brand is not shiny. We're not shiny.
Interesting.
So he said, so we're not going to do coated stock. So our business cards aren't shiny.
I mean, but it's true.
Even down to that, he wanted to kind of be consistent about it. So for those of you on the phone, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you all had as much fun as I clearly did having this great conversation with my friend Jane. And let us know if we can be of assistance to you and your organization on your branding journeys.
Absolutely.
Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Joanna.
Bye.
Bye.